Rude biker rips off waitress's shirt. What he saw froze the whole bar. He was scum. The kind of man who mistakes silence for weakness. In a bar full of people, he decided the waitress was his target. He snarled, he grabbed, and with one vicious tug, he tore her work shirt from her shoulder. The crowd gasped, ready to see her shame. But the only person who froze in pure, ice-cold terror was him. Because what he revealed wasn't a scar, it was a membership card to a club he'd just declared war on. Hey, store lover. Welcome to the Narrative Hub, Reddit Stories. Believe me, this adventure gets wild, but it's only epic with you. Seriously, you make this possible. Want more stories? Greater adventure? Smash subscribe right now. Smash like. Comment below. Let's go. Murphy's bar was having its usual Tuesday night crowd, nothing too rowdy, just locals nursing their drinks and watching the game on the old TV mounted above the bar. The air was thick with cigarette smoke and the smell of stale beer, exactly what you'd expect from a dive bar on the wrong side of town. Veronica had been working there for 3 months. Quiet, efficient, never complained about the grabby customers or the lousy tips. She kept her head down, did her job, and minded her own business. At 24, she looked younger, innocent even, with her blonde hair pulled back in a simple ponytail and her oversized work shirt that seemed to swallow her small frame. That's when he walked in. The door slammed open like a gunshot, and in strutted Jake Bull Morrison, 6 feet 4 inches, 280 pounds of pure meanness wrapped in leather and attitude. His Harley's engine was still rumbling outside, and his boots hit the floor with the kind of authority that made conversations stop mid-sentence. Bull had a reputation in this town. 3 arrests for assault, 2 restraining orders, and a string of bar fights that had gotten him banned from half the establishments in the county. Murphy's was one of the few places that still served him, and only because old Murphy was too scared to say no. Bull's eyes swept the room like a predator sizing up prey. The bartender, Danny, instinctively reached for the baseball bat he kept behind the register. The handful of patrons suddenly became very interested in their drinks. But Bull's attention locked onto Veronica. "Hey, sweetheart," he called out, his voice dripping with false charm. "How about you bring me a whiskey? And make it a double." Veronica nodded, her hands steady as she grabbed a bottle from the top shelf. But Bull wasn't done. "You know what? Make that a triple. And while you're at it," he grabbed her wrist as she set the glass down. "Why don't you sit on my lap and tell me your life story?" The bar went quiet. This was the moment everyone had been dreading. "I'm just here to work, sir," Veronica said softly, trying to pull her wrist free. Her voice was calm, but there was something underneath it, not fear, but something else. Something watchful. Bull's grip tightened. "I don't think you heard me right, princess. I said." She said no. The voice came from the back of the bar, a weathered man in his 50s with graying hair and calloused hands. Tom Jenkins, a construction foreman who'd been coming to Murphy's for 20 years. Bull's head snapped around. "This ain't your business, old man." "Making it my business." That's when Bull made his first mistake. He stood up, all 280 pounds of him, and took a step toward Tom. But he kept hold of Veronica's wrist, using her as an anchor. "You want to dance, Grandpa? Because I'll put you in the ground." Tom didn't back down. Neither did 3 other men who slowly stood up from their stools. The testosterone in the room was climbing toward a breaking point. But Bull was done playing games. "You know what?" Bull snarled, his face twisted with rage. "I'm tired of being the bad guy. Let's see what this little angel is really hiding." In one vicious motion, he grabbed the collar of Veronica's oversized work shirt and ripped it down from her shoulder, exposing her back to the entire bar. The crowd gasped, expecting to see exactly what perverts like Bull wanted to see. Instead, they saw ink. Black ink. Professional work. Covering her entire shoulder blade and disappearing down her back. But it wasn't just any tattoo. It was a skull with wings, surrounded by the words "Death Before Dishonor" in Gothic lettering. Below that, in smaller script, "Phantom Riders MC Prospect." And below that, the name that made every single person in that bar feel like they'd just walked over their own grave. Sponsored by Tommy the Reaper Castellano. The silence was deafening. Bull's face went from red with rage to white as a sheet in about 2 seconds. His hand released Veronica's shirt like he'd been burned, and he took an involuntary step backward. Because everyone in that room, everyone, knew exactly who Tommy the Reaper Castellano was. Tommy Castellano wasn't just any biker. He was the president of the Phantom Riders, the most feared motorcycle club on the East Coast. They controlled everything from drug trafficking to illegal gambling across 3 states. They had judges in their pocket, cops on their payroll, and a body count that would make the mafia jealous. And Tommy didn't just protect his club members. He owned them. Every Phantom Rider, every prospect, every associate was his property. Touch one of them, and you weren't just picking a fight with a person, you were declaring war on an organization with the resources and ruthlessness to erase you from existence. But that wasn't the shocking part. The shocking part was what happened next. Veronica straightened up, pulled her torn shirt back into place, and looked Bull dead in the eyes. When she smiled, it wasn't the sweet, innocent smile of a small-town waitress. It was the cold, calculating smile of someone who had just watched their prey walk into a trap. "You want to know the funny thing," she said, her voice no longer soft and submissive. "I've been working here for 3 months, waiting for someone like you to show up." Bull's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. "See, Tommy's been getting reports about a certain biker who likes to rough up women in bars. A guy who thinks he's tough because he can intimidate people who can't fight back. We've been looking for you, Jake." The use of his real name hit him like a physical blow. "How do you know your name? Your address? Your mother's maiden name? The fact that you've got $1,700 hidden in a coffee can under your bed." Veronica's smile widened. "Honey, we've known everything about you for weeks. The only question was whether you were stupid enough to put your hands on the wrong person." That's when the front door opened again. And again. And again. 6 men walked in, each one bigger and meaner looking than the last. They weren't wearing colors, but the way they moved, controlled, coordinated, lethal, made it clear they were all cut from the same cloth. The last man through the door was different. Older, maybe 60, with silver hair and scars that told stories nobody wanted to hear. He moved with the quiet confidence of someone who had never, in his entire life, been afraid of another human being. "Tommy," Veronica said, nodding respectfully. Tommy the Reaper Castellano looked around the bar, taking in the frozen patrons, the terrified bartender, and finally, Bull Morrison, who was now visibly shaking. "Ronnie," Tommy said, his voice quiet but carrying the weight of absolute authority. "You okay?" "I'm fine. Just needed to see how far he'd go." Tommy nodded, then turned his attention to Bull. Jake Morrison. Born July 15, 1989. 3 arrests for assault, 2 for domestic violence, 1 for sexual harassment. Lives at 412 Oak Street in a trailer that belongs to his grandmother, Martha Morrison, who's currently in St. Mary's Hospital recovering from hip surgery. Bull's face went from white to green. "The way I see it," Tommy continued, "you've got 2 choices. Choice 1. We handle this the traditional way. My boys take you out back, we have a little conversation about respect, and then we see how well you swim with concrete boots." The bar was so quiet you could hear people's hearts beating. Choice 2. You get on your knees, apologize to my prospect here, and then you disappear. Leave town. Tonight. Never come back. Never touch another woman without permission again. Because if I hear even a whisper that you've stepped out of line." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. But Bull, in a moment of pure desperation or stupidity, decided to go for option 3. He lunged forward, grabbing a beer bottle from the nearest table and swinging it at Veronica's head. He never even got close. Before the bottle was halfway through its arc, Veronica had stepped aside, grabbed Bull's wrist, and twisted it at an angle that made everyone in the bar wince. The bottle crashed to the floor as Bull screamed in pain. 12 years of mixed martial arts, she said calmly, maintaining the hold that had Bull on his knees. For years in the army, special forces. 2 tours in Afghanistan. I didn't become a Phantom Rider prospect because I was somebody's girlfriend. I earned it. She looked down at Bull, who was now whimpering and trying to tap out like this was some kind of UFC match. And just so we're clear, I wasn't working here because I needed the money. I was working here because we knew you'd show up eventually. This whole thing was a setup from day one. Tommy smiled for the first time since he'd walked in. Ronnie, you want to do the honors? Veronica looked thoughtful. You know what? I think option 2 is still on the table. What do you say, Jake? You ready to apologize and get the hell out of our town? Bull nodded frantically, tears streaming down his face. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'll leave. I'll never come back. Veronica released his wrist and stepped back. Bull scrambled to his feet, stumbling toward the door like his pants were on fire. He was almost there when Tommy spoke one last time. Jake. Bull froze with his hand on the door handle. If I were you, I'd keep running until I hit the ocean. And even then, I might consider swimming. After Bull's motorcycle roared away into the night, the bar slowly came back to life. Tommy and his crew melted away as quietly as they'd arrived, but not before Tommy handed Danny the bartender a roll of bills thick enough to choke a horse. For the trouble, he said. And the silence. Veronica straightened her torn shirt and went back to work like nothing had happened. But the other patrons couldn't stop staring at her. Tom Jenkins, the construction foreman who'd first stood up to Bull, finally worked up the courage to approach her. You really are a Phantom Rider? Veronica smiled, not the cold, predator smile she'd shown Bull, but something warmer. Prospect. Still earning my colors. But yeah. And this was all planned? Not exactly. We knew Bull was operating in this area, and we knew he'd eventually pick the wrong target. I volunteered to be bait. She shrugged. Turned out to be a pretty good assignment. But why? I mean, why go through all this trouble for one lowlife? Veronica's expression grew serious. Because guys like Bull don't stop. They escalate. Tonight it was grabbing and humiliating a waitress. Next week it might be something worse. Tommy's got daughters, granddaughters. We all do. Sometimes you have to cut the cancer out before it spreads. Tom nodded slowly. And the shirt thing? Had to sell it. Had to make sure he was committed to the path he was on. No backing out, no second chances. She adjusted her ponytail. Besides, the girls at the clubhouse are going to get a kick out of hearing how their newest prospect handled her first solo operation. As the night wore on and the story spread, one detail kept bothering Tom. Finally, he worked up the courage to ask. Veronica, that tattoo. It looked fresh. Professional, but fresh. She grinned. Got it done yesterday. The ink's barely dry. Tom's eyes widened. You mean? I mean I've been a prospect for exactly 48 hours. This was my initiation. Tommy wanted to see if I could handle myself in a real situation, not just a training exercise. And if you'd failed? Then I would have been just another waitress who got roughed up by a biker. But I didn't fail. She touched the spot where her tattoo was hidden beneath the torn fabric. And now I've got a story that'll be told around clubhouses for the next 20 years. As if on cue, her phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen and smiled. Tommy? Tom asked. Better. That was my sponsor. I'm officially no longer a prospect. She held up her phone, showing a text that read, "Welcome to the Phantom Riders. Ceremony is Saturday. Don't be late." The bar erupted in applause, from the same people who'd been terrified for their lives just an hour earlier. "So," Tom said, raising his beer, "what do we call you now?" And somewhere on Highway 95, Jake Bull Morrison was still driving, his hands shaking on the handlebars, knowing that he'd just learned the hardest lesson of his life. Sometimes the prey is the predator, and sometimes the innocent waitress is the most dangerous person in the room. The bar went back to normal, but the story lived on. And every time someone new heard it, they walked away with the same thought. Be careful who you mess with, because you never know who they really are or who's got their back.